We really appreciate On The Flow Network being joined by National Party leader David Littleproud. David, you're heading into Canberra's big budget week. How are you feeling about it?
Pretty nervous, I've got to say, Ricky. I think what we've seen before, the talk from the Treasurer and the Prime Minister and the Finance Minister, doesn't send great signals of confidence to regional rural Australia. I think they're going to square up with us to spend money in metropolitan areas and forget about the programs that we put in place that ensured regional Australians, which are 30% of the population, live outside a metropolitan area. We're ensuring that we continue to invest in, not just in giving them the infrastructure they need, but investing in their future, in the infrastructure that was going to not just shore up supply chains of getting infrastructure in place that will get a product from a paddock or a pit to a port that pays the bills or even to your plate, but also to grow and to put that infrastructure in that will help give the investment confidence. And I fear we're going to see a swathe of cuts in regional rural Australia, all to be rediverted to Melbourne, Sydney and Brisbane.
And that's going to be concerning if that is what eventuates, because I know the Coalition had a number of spending initiatives to develop resilience also in regional communities, and some of them are under intense pressure almost for the opposite reason, not drought, but flooding.
Exactly. And look, this was the thing, is that we want to look to the future around not just flood mitigation, but using this thing called common sense. And not just mitigate for flood, but use the water to build industry and infrastructure up and down our river systems, to plumb our nation, because that's one of the things you can't do without is water. And actually one of the frightening things is there'll be a 37% reduction in storage capacity per person per megalitre of water by 2030 because no one's bothered to dig a hole. No one's bothered to store water so that people, even in cities, have the amenity to turn a tap on, let alone thinking about how we might make that investment that will grow regional communities. There's $7 billion that we set aside to give that investment confidence to state governments have got to do it. And that's not necessarily just big dams. That's also water infrastructure that would get efficiencies and create new increased water capacity. Those are the types of things that we were passionate about, but also these programs. You understand that we create them for regional Australia because these councils don't have big rate bases. So we're looking to put infrastructure in partnership with councils in particular, where they don't have the rate base, like Sydney City would make more in parking fines than what most regional councils would make in rates. So they don't have the capacity to build any infrastructure. They need federal governments to partner with them. And that's why we create these programs. So not just dams, it's actually just amenities that you have in your towns that won't be able to be built because local government just doesn't have the capacity. And so if you take away these programs, it's regional Australians that'll hurt because councils just don't have the support they need from federal government and state government.
And when you mentioned dams there, the Murray-Darling Basin Authority met on Friday. Their communique issued Monday indicated that the basin storages have never been so full. The Coalition road tested the sort of $6 billion dam initiative at Hell's Gate in North Queensland. Was there time and place to perhaps be pushing for a dam improvement in the Murray-Darling Basin as well?
Well, there is, and this is the thing, is that isn't that just common sense? I mean, despite what Tim Flannery said, it'd never rain again. We are going to get large-scale events, and so why wouldn't we mitigate with water infrastructure that'll catch that water in a good time and distribute in the past? And you know what? If our forefathers hadn't built dams along the Murray-Darling during the middle of the drought in 18, 19, 20, there would have been an environmental catastrophe. The Murray would have went dry, and it has gone dry back in 1902. So it's not as though it hasn't happened before, but because our forefathers had the foresight to build storage and to store water in the good times, we were able to have positive environmental outcomes. But you don't hear too many people celebrating that and what that's done for regional Australia. So why wouldn't we consider doing more along those lines now? And the Victorian government's already ruled out water infrastructure dams to store more water. But I just think that we're at a juncture where people can see common sense and they want governments to grab it when it's there. And these are the types of opportunities when you see mitigation that can be achieved and then growing the pie for regional Australia, giving us a future, then why wouldn't you do it? And this is where I'm worried about that $7 billion. And we shouldn't be afraid of looking at that in the Murray-Darling Basin. We should look at the good times when there's big river flows to catch that and to regulate and to use it so that whether it be in South Australia or up in my part of the world in Queensland, everyone gets a bite of the cherry, and we can actually get more, not just for the environment, but for our communities that will grow our communities.
Yeah, we'll just want to come on to farmers and infrastructure in just a moment, but just lastly with the Murray-Darling Basin, there's been this deadline much talked about, the prospect of buybacks by 2024. It does seem a little bit odd, does it, that we're talking about buybacks and water-saving infrastructure when some of it's underwater?
Yeah, well, I mean, this is just an ideology that they just want to take more water and they don't care how they do it or the impact on communities. And I've got to say that people have got fatigue on the Murray-Darling, and we should be proud of what we've achieved. We've delivered 80% of the water recovery that's required under the plan. The last 20% doesn't have to be taken off communities or farmers. It can be done with infrastructure. If it's done with the smarts of the 21st century, common sense of just making sure we deliver the water that we said we would, and then we should get the hell out of people's lives. And that's where we were, but now Tanya Plibersek decides, no, we're going to use this big stick called buybacks. And that won't hurt a farmer who sells the water. That'll hurt the local machinery dealer, the local irrigation shop. Those are the people that hurt, because when farmers leave, there's no one to spend the money on them. So this is what we're just saying. The war should be over. It was over. The Basin Plan was complete. All it needed was infrastructure, and then we should get the hell out of people's lives. There's been enough hurt, enough anguish. And I've got to say, South Australians have been mature about this, but to try and politicise it again and bring it back up isn't the Australian way. And I think it's more that Tanya Plibersek doesn't understand the plan and the intricacies of the plan, and to use a weapon like buybacks sends shudders through communities right around the country, not just on the East Coast, but in South Australia as well.
Well, for our Victorian listeners, I'd fall off my chair if there was a commitment to a Murray Basin Rail project, but surely we need to be looking at rail in potentially flood-affected areas, given the amount of damage trucks will do on roads with big harvests.
Exactly, and this is an opportunity. I mean, our guys down there, Ann Webster and Sam Birrell, have been yelling about this for so long, and the money's been cut. In fact, Dan Andrews just simply had to get on with the job, but he's been on a dithering exercise and slowing it down. And this is where, they're about to give $2.2 million for a rail system around Melbourne, but couldn't get on with the job of giving us a rail system that'll not just get us our produce to be able to survive our inputs, but also be able to send our product to port. And particularly when you see floods, and you see what happened in Western Australia when the Western Australia's connection was cut from those floods for weeks. We need to have that first-class infrastructure to keep supply chains going, not just in regional Australia, but right across the country. And this is where you've got to get your priorities right. $2.2 billion for a rail line around the suburbs of Melbourne, or something that'll grow the pie, something that'll improve our nation's economy, pay the bills, make sure we've got an NDIS, make sure we've got a Medicare. That's about prioritisation, and that's what I fear in this budget. There's no priority of understanding return on investment to the Australian taxpayer.
Well, the $6 billion that the Albanese government's pledged on renewable energy suggests they're focused on one type of network in northwest Victoria in the form of poles and wires, but not on a rail network.
Well, and this is the problem. The poles and wires, we heard about the gold plating by Julia Gillard. This is platinum plating. I mean, and what they're going to do across rural properties, particularly in Victoria. I was down at Elmore Field Days, and I can tell you it was red hot. Farmers have got big concerns about these big transmission lines, these huge platinum-plated lines going across their properties, causing them significant distress. And there's really, because of this rush into renewables, we're all for renewables, but if you do it sensibly, you don't have to do the things that Labor are doing, and that's where your priorities are wrong. And ultimately, let me tell you, you're going to pay that back. There's no return to the Australian taxpayer on that, because if you look at your electricity bill now, half of it is in for poles and wires. So if you're going to rush and you're going to pay about $80 billion in doing poles and wires right across this country, you will pay for that in your electricity bill. The generation might go down because renewables are cheaper to generate, but the capital expenditure in building them, and then the poles and wires, the platinum plating the poles and wires, has to be repaid, and that gets repaid through your bill. So this is the challenge where government, we all want to reduce our emissions, but let's use common sense, let's use technology in a sensible way that doesn't put household pressure, doesn't put business pressure, because ultimately they're the ones who create jobs, not government.
Now, one last one. I've just thought when it comes to nuclear energy, you've talked with us before about having the nuclear conversation. One of your senators, Matt Canavan, Queensland colleague, is going to put up a bill, he tells us, with Senator Alex Antic to allow or get rid of the ban on nuclear energy. Does the party have a position on that at this stage?
Well, yeah, that is the National Party's position, and Matt's run off on his own. But the Nationals were the ones that led that. And when I became leader, I wrote to the Prime Minister. And this isn't about big nuclear power plants. This is about a conversation of bringing the population with us, because we just talked about transmission lines. The new emerging technology, the small-scale modular, they're very small and portable, and you can actually plug them in to where coal-fired power stations are now. And so you don't need new transmission lines. So this is the exciting thing, that technology, the technology that's emerging in Northern America is cheaper and safer and should give us more comfort. But we've got to get Australians comfortable with it. We're trying to do that. We've finally got the Liberals to agree with us that this is a conversation the nation should have. And I said to the Prime Minister, let's have a conversation. Let's Australians decide their energy mix, not politicians. This is their future. And on an issue as important as this, we should have all the information about the technology of small-scale modular. I'm not one for a big nuclear power plant. Don't want to see that at all. But I am open-minded to the technology that's coming through, that we shouldn't close our minds to that. And if we can reduce emissions, if it can give us reliable power and cheaper power, then that's just common sense. And that's something we should explore as a nation. We should explore it together. And as political leaders, we should create the environment for that. And that's what I'm saying to Anthony Albanese. Have the conversation. Let Australians decide, not us.
Well, thank you very much for joining us in conversation, National Party leader. You've been generous with your time, and we'll catch you again soon.
Anytime, mate. Good to be with you.